IU fans, look, the Hoosiers had a fascinating trip to New York City. 2 games where you learned a whole lot about this basketball team. And stunningly, Mike Woodson, a Bob Knight disciple, went to a 2-3 zone in dark times in the middle of that second half against Louisville. And it worked. So now what do the Hoosiers do going forward? IU's 4-1. They don't have a bad loss. They don't have a great win. They've got a tricky slate of games coming up. Matt and I are going to discuss IU's trip to the Empire Classic, preview Harvard, discuss a bunch of other things related to IU men's basketball, and so much more here on episode 315 of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. We're recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on Wednesday, November 22nd, 2023, where I'm your host, Nithin Krishnan. Here with me today is my normal co-host, Matt Lukens. Matt, it was a 77-57 loss to UConn, a 74-66 win over Louisville, a mixed bag of fun coming out of that Sunday-Monday set of games. What are your initial takeaways from IU's weekend in Madison Square Garden?
Well, my initial takeaway is that I would like to do a victory lap. This 5-second segment that I'm going to do is my victory lap. I said that IU would be better off going zone this year because of the personnel that they have on the team. And they went zone. And according to Kenny Payne, it was a surprise to him. It was a surprise to a lot of us that know what Coach Woodson's about and how he kind of likes to play his teams and likes to play defense and whatnot. But I will let you know this. It looked good. And it was the reason why Indiana ended up pulling away with that game. And a game in which they probably had no business winning the way that they were playing for a majority of that game. And they completely shut down. I think Louisville had 1 field goal in the last 9 minutes.
Yep.
And there's no mistake as to why that was the case. You know, the length, the size, the athleticism, the versatility that Indiana has on the defensive end, it would be perfect for a Jim Boeheim 1-3-1 zone. Literally, this is
put him in orange uniforms, white and orange uniforms.
No, seriously, I think when you look at this team, it screams to me prime Syracuse. That's what it does. Like the prime Syracuse zone, the one that Indiana had so much trouble with in 2013 and then ended up getting into the Final Four, right? Like this team can do that. This team 100% can reignite that sort of style of play.
Yes.
And I'm not being crazy about it. Like seriously, they are that good and that talented that they can do that. It's just they got to commit to playing more of it, I think. Like, it's fine if you want to switch up defenses from time to time. I think that's actually probably smart, right? Is to come out of a timeout and be like, all right, we're going to be playing man right now.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody know who their assignments are, right? And then, you know, the next possession go, you know what? We're switching to zone. That didn't work. Let's switch to zone. I think that would be so freaking smart.
Especially if Caleb Banks is on the court, right? Caleb had one of his best games as an Indiana Hoosier. 8 points, 3 blocks, 3 steals, few rebounds as well. You could really see his length causing problems for Louisville in the zone. When the front court has Malik Renault and Khalil Ware in it, you certainly know that those 2 guys are going to be able to take care of the front line of the zone down low as the guards cause disruption up top. I do have to be fair to Louisville. Matt, they had 2 field goals in the last 9:54, with the last one coming from Sky Clark with about 4 seconds left.
Okay.
We
all
just
right. In
non-garbage time,
minutes,
right? Non-garbage time.
In non-garbage minutes, they had 1 field goal.
I know. You're absolutely right, and it was a stroke of genius from Mike Woodson. It was hilarious to hear him speak to Don Fisher after the game and saying, "Hey, someone mentioned it in the huddle." And we just wanted to, we just said, and Mike Woodson said, "Hey, why the heck not?" It's a game where you have to win. Indiana hasn't suffered a quad 3 or quad 4 loss in the Mike Woodson era. That would have been the case had they not pulled out a critical curveball there in the final handful of minutes in order to beat the Louisville Cardinals. Malik Reneau had double-digit performances in each of his 2 games in Madison Square Garden. Xavier Johnson made some critical plays late in order to help the Hoosiers knock off the Cardinals. The game against UConn wasn't all that great. IU was absolutely plastered in the second half by the Huskies, defending national champs. I actually thought in the first half the Hoosiers did a lot of good things. The IU fans showed up like crazy. It's great hearing them in New York City as being there in person. It was a majority Indiana crowd, even though UConn geographically is much, much closer to New York City than Madison Square Garden is. But at the end of that game against the Huskies, you certainly saw the talented guards on UConn just win that backcourt battle, and Khalil Ware just couldn't keep that second half going like he did in the first. Matt, let's just ask the $1 million question here. Mackenzie Mbako has been struggling a little bit. Caleb Banks stepped up. The zone is doing some good things. That zone defense has to be a weapon here for Indiana going forward. That's how I see it. And I know you agree. The question I have for you is, does Mackenzie Mbako see more playing time coming up, or do you think this is going to be someone that sits at 15 to 25 minutes here for the handful of games to come?
Well, like Coach Woodson says, Mbako's kind of learning how to play college basketball, right? And, he said, he's a 5-star recruit, but, 5 stars also have to learn how to be a 5-star, right? And how to play like a 5-star. Well, Mbako's learning how to do that, guys. Like, let's be honest here. He hasn't looked like the player that we thought he was going to be in the first couple of weeks, and that's fine. Like, that's okay, because he's a freshman, and freshmen learn, and they adapt faster than most other players will, right? Because they're not a finished product, right? They're not
right.
They're not the player that they are going to hopefully be in, a shorter amount of time, right? So I hope that IU can figure it out with Mbako. I don't have my strong beliefs that he will.
Yeah, here's where I struggle, right? Here's where I struggle with Mbako because, it's a combination of me seeing him in person, seeing him on TV, hearing what other people have to say as far as individuals whose opinions that I trust. This to me isn't so much of Mackenzie Mbako is going through that steep freshman learning curve. I think you can maybe make that case with Gabe Cupps, who, okay, we've seen him do a lot of good things from an effort standpoint, from a defense standpoint, but the offense needs to catch up, right? You're not going to see him put up double figures too often, things like that. With Mackenzie Mbako, my frustration is these are a lot of mistakes that are getting repeated. This is a product of some instances where I don't see him being physical enough, doing the simple things, doing the effort things to help Indiana either keep their lead or separate from their opponent. I'm not necessarily expecting him to score 20.
He looks like a high school basketball player.
And
in all due respect, he looks like a high school basketball player.
And it's one of those things
he is a high school basketball player.
Opposing players are beating him backdoor. They're fighting through him for second chance rebounds. I don't care if Mackenzie Mbako scores another basket the next few games. Right? I need him to stop overhelping off of perimeter shooters, trust his teammates, stop getting beat backdoor, whether it's UConn or Louisville. I mean, these are critical points in the game where these mistakes are happening. It happened at the start of the second half against UConn. It happened in crunch time against Florida Gulf Coast and Wright State. It happened in the middle of the second half against Louisville. That's the kind of stuff. I don't care if Mackenzie Mbako scores. I need him to avoid making those silly mistakes defensively, and I don't think I'm asking too much.
I mean, I wouldn't mind him making a jump shot or two. Let's be honest here. I'm not saying he needs to be a defensive player, but he has to be playable. He's got to be playable on defense. He has to play with the fundamentals. He's got to earn playing time the right way by playing hard and playing like within the system and trusting his teammates.
Exactly.
Right? Like ultimately, what we've seen the problem with him is that he doesn't trust his teammates enough.
Right.
He just doesn't. He doesn't trust his teammates enough. He overhelps. He's slow on defense to help when somebody asks for it. Right. It's a chemistry thing, and he's got to learn that he's got to be a part of a symbiotic relationship with his teammates, or he's not going to play. Straight up, he's just not
And
going to
that's
play,
what we've
right?
seen. We've seen
Because he's
Mike
making
Woodson
the
pull.
other 4 guys worse. What's the point of playing him?
Right. I totally agree. And especially when you consider, it's a matter of not trusting his teammates. It's a matter of getting beat backdoor. I'm curious to see what Mackenzie Mbako looks like in his own defense. We've only seen Caleb Banks. So I'm curious to see if Mike Woodson deploys that tactic between now and maybe that Big Ten back-to-back stretch. Of course, you have Auburn and Kansas coming up after that. Because let's face it, Matt, right now, Ken Palm is Indiana number 81 in the country. Ken Palm is Indiana finishing 15-16 on the season, 7-13 in the Big Ten. This is not an NCAA tournament team. Fortunately,
and anybody that's watched this team would tell you that they're
you're
not
delusional if you
team.
think they are. Now, the good news is you have some big games coming up. You got the Big Ten slate. Season doesn't end tomorrow. I think it's clear for everyone that the step that Indiana needs to take between now and making the NCAA tournament, the way you get there is through Mackenzie Mbako improving. Is that the biggest piece you see that needs to happen between now and the end of the season, or do you think there's something else that can get the Hoosiers to go dancing in March?
No, there's a couple more things that need to happen. I think you got to figure out with the big situation what situationally who plays where. Like where.
Yeah.
Really, really desperately struggled with UConn and Klingon. Like that
second half, especially
kind of physicality really fucked with him. He couldn't really do much. He didn't offer very much in terms of positive offensive or defensive output when that was a thing, right? So, okay. Do you go with Sparks in that situation? Well, in the Louisville game, Sparks looked awesome in the minutes he played, but that means you're not playing Ware, who might be your best player, right?
Yeah.
So,
as far as the bigs, how would you set that up? Right. Exactly. That's kind of the tough question for Mike Woodson, isn't it?
Yeah. That's one question. 2, Caleb Banks. Does he take Mbako's minutes? Does he take away from Trey Galloway, who's been shooting terribly to be nice, right? Do you look for another option? Does CJ Gunn play more? He's been showing a lot on defense, but he's really not been able to spread the floor like was advertised when he was recruited to Indiana. Where does the outside shooting come from? Do you start playing Leal a little bit more, right? Is that somebody you maybe look to? So there's a lot of people that could see their minutes uptick, and there's a lot of people who are going to have to take a backseat, right? I love what Trey Galloway offers us on the defensive end, and offensively, he can share the ball, which is pretty awesome to see from a player of that position. But does that mean he's a 40-minute player? Right? No, because we have other people who play other roles in that same position, right? So, I mean, we're just going to have to see what the staff prioritizes here. And I have a feeling it's going to be defense, right? If you can play defense, you're going to get minutes. And we've seen that consistently in the Mike Woodson era, that's a thing. Like, if you can play defense, you'll get minutes. And Caleb Banks earned those against Louisville. And he'll probably earn those again at some point this year.
Yeah, and I think that might be what Indiana has to do between now and, say, sort of the thick of the Big Ten season. I think that's going to be a critical question as far as how many players do you really give significant playing time to over the course of a game? Right now, Mike Woodson wants to give minutes to all 10 guys that are available, with the exception of Anthony Leal. I understand that philosophy right now, but I think as you get towards the end of December into January, I mean, folks, Matt Painter yesterday played just 6 guys in the second half against Tennessee.
Yeah, because that's what good teams do. They play their best players, and they play them quite often.
And
with Purdue,
Yeah.
With Purdue, it makes sense. Like they're not even playing Ethan Morton anymore. They're
No,
barely playing
Gillis didn't
Miles
play much.
Colvin. Gillis didn't play much. It's like what the five is Braden Smith, their new transfer from Southern
Lance Jones.
Illinois,
Yep.
Lance Jones, a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
TKR
Mm-hmm.
first, and Edie.
Yep.
That was the six,
That's it.
right? Yeah, and all six of those guys deserve their minutes, right?
And it's not a handout, right? Playing time isn't a handout. It's
No,
not something that people have a right to. It's something that
no,
people have
it's not
to earn.
earned because of stars. It's earned through practice. It's earned through playing time. It's earned through production and playing well with your teammates and all that jazz.
Exactly. And as far as I'm concerned, hey, I understand Mike Woodson giving his 10 scholarship guys run the early part of the season, but over the next couple weeks, I want to see him trim that down, especially when I'm looking here and I'm seeing Indiana right now having the one of the worst marks in the country as it relates to the percentage of points they get from the 3-point arc. I mean, we're talking
Yeah.
about 360th out of 362 Division One teams. That's never how successful basketball teams at Indiana have done their business. Maybe that's how other programs do it. I don't know. But Mike Woodson knows it as much as anyone else.
Does Syracuse do it?
I mean, you gotta find more production from the 3-point arc. And of course, Indiana fans are smart. Mike Woodson is smart. You know, it's not just a matter of, hey, pull up and chuck a 3-point shot in the first 10 seconds of the shot clock. But from what I'm seeing here, the way Indiana does it is by pulling Ware and Renew out of the post. I think that's a good start. Try to get a couple of
Hey,
more looks from deep in transition. You know, if
yeah,
Indiana can't get good looks at the rim on 2-on-1s and 3-on-2s, maybe have one of those guys flare out to the arc and get an easy 3 in transition that way. But flat out, the Hoosiers have to get more from downtown.
dude, Renew's got to play more. I love what I see. Malik Renew really reminds me a lot of
Got to stay out of foul trouble though,
first
Matt.
year. Yeah, yeah, but in this way too, he reminds me of first year Trace Jackson Davis, right? That undersized big that has like a go-to couple post moves, lefty that works, and then obviously can't stay out of foul trouble because he's playing too physical. That just screams Trace to me, right? And so I mean, he's a year behind because Trace was like that his freshman year, right? And Malik's here in his sophomore year, kind of starting to look like that. But you got to give him more run, and then I think Ware could take a nice page or two or five out of the Malik Renew post tutorial,
Sure.
right? Like that little runner hook that Renew does that always
Mm-hmm.
works. Like, bro, he needs to. Ware needs one of those.
He does. That will definitely help. At the same time, Khalil Ware is at 43% from beyond the arc this year. And it's only been on 7 shots, 7 attempts, but we know that's something that he's able to bring to the table. I can easily see a situation where Johnson, Renew, and Ware effectively play a smooth and efficient 3-man game in half court sets where Renew mans the post, Johnson drives the lanes as needed, distributes the basketball, and Khalil Ware is able to head out there beyond the arc and knock down some threes. I know that's not the conventional look when you've got a guy who's a 7-foot center, but this is the way it works in college basketball nowadays. You've
If
got
it
stretch
works, it
fours,
works. No
you
one's
got
gonna
stretch
no one's gonna be
fives.
like, is it
Mike
is it
Woodson beautifully helped Julius Randle develop that 3-point shot in New York before coming to Indiana. Copy paste with Ware, maybe a little bit more with Renew, and help unlock something with this offense because right now it's around the 100th best offense in college basketball. That's not good enough. And so,
no?
you got 5 tough games coming up. The Hoosiers, Matt, I'm not expecting them to even go 3-2 in this stretch. I think a 2-3 record over these next 5 games would be okay. But if
Yeah,
that means you're
that's
also
fine with me.
unlocking some things, that's what I'm paying attention to. Am I crazy there?
No, you're not crazy. These games are hard, and some of them are winnable. Like, I don't think I thought before the year that the Kansas game was going to be winnable, but in my opinion, the Kansas game is winnable. Right? They have not looked good. They are putting a bunch of pieces together. A
For that,
future
for that, yeah.
or a former Hoosier transfer target
Mm,
and Timberlake has
mm,
really struggled early on this year
yeah.
for Kansas. He cannot find his shot, right? He was a guy that Indiana recruited for outside shooting only, right? Like that was his one big thing that he had going for him, is that he has an outside shot and Indiana needed outside shooting. And clearly that, if you've watched any of the Hoosiers games this year, that has been pretty freaking obvious that they need outside shooting. And it's something that I hope that they like kind of highlight going into next year. But he's really struggled, and then their rotations are really weird, and so that game looks winnable. Whereas some other games I didn't think were going to be as hard, like the Auburn game. Auburn looks tough, and especially that's on a neutral. That's going to be hard for Indiana to win that, in my opinion.
Maryland, Michigan, Big Ten slate, right? In between with that Maryland game coming up a week
Maryland,
from
I thought was going to be
Friday.
good. I thought Michigan was going to be bad. Now I'm thinking quite
Kind of
the
flipped.
opposite, right?
Yeah.
I think Michigan is looking a lot better than Maryland, and Maryland's having some issues, right? So again, like it's we're in a topsy turvy, upside down world right now as far as what these next couple games are. And Harvard doesn't look bad either.
Harvard's better than Louisville. We'll get into that preview a little bit here in just a moment. It's funny that you mentioned Michigan. They did lose at home to Long Beach State recently, and now they're going to have the battle for Atlantis come up this week before they return home after a road game against Oregon. So a lot going on there for the Michigan Wolverines as far as their schedule coming up. We're going to dive into this IU basketball team so much more here in just a moment. But first, it's time for Who Won the Week this past week in IU sports. And we'd be ridiculous if we didn't tip our cap to the IU men's soccer program, who advanced to the Sweet 16 for the 9th straight season after a difficult 3-2 win at number 10 national seed Wake Forest. The Hoosiers were the road team because Wake deserved that national seed, but Indiana dominated the game overall, winning shots on goal, winning corner kicks. And then in the 94th minute, Hugo Bacharach scored the game-winning goal for the Hoosiers, his second goal of the game. Carson Henderlong had the other one for IU in that victory. Now Indiana goes to number 7 seed Virginia for a Sweet 16 matchup on Sunday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Make sure you tune in for that before Indiana takes on Harvard. And just like that, your Sunday to end Thanksgiving weekend is set up beautifully as far as IU sports are concerned. Folks, if you'd like to subscribe to our podcast for free, all you have to do is search for the Hoosier Sound wherever you listen to podcasts. Stay up to date by all of our information by following us on Twitter at Indiana HQ or at the Hoosier Sound. If you enjoy our show, this part is important. Leave us a review, tell a friend, share our links. That kind of support really helps us grow this podcast and reach more passionate IU fans such as yourself. I saw so many passionate IU fans at Madison Square Garden in both of those games on Sunday and Monday. The Hoosier fan base is what this program has going for it. If without the fans, I'm really not sure what IU would be. And so, hey, you've got those. And of course, when a team like Kansas or Maryland comes to Assembly Hall, IU fans will try to give the Hoosiers that home field advantage. Matt, when it's all said and done, we're able to breathe a little bit here. 5 games in, Indiana's 4-1. They don't have an ugly loss on their resume just yet. They definitely have to record
a lot more than other Big Ten teams, by the way.
It's legit, and it's going to be part of that conversation. I do feel like the selection committee does give a little more credit to great wins compared to really knocking you for bad losses. But hey, if you don't have a bad loss, that's great. Now, where do you see IU stacking up in the Big Ten here? Of course, the first Big Ten game is on December 1st, right around the corner before that trip to Michigan on the 5th. Where do you see Indiana stacking up in the Big Ten right now? And is this a league that you think is better than it was last year, or do you think it's taken a step back?
I think the eventually will be better than last year because I think there's better guards in the conference. But right now, as things stands, no, it's the conference is worse, a lot worse actually than it was last year. So I mean, Purdue's better,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean anything when the rest of the conference is bad, right? So again, Indiana's got to figure out how to put together a little more like a better stretch of games here. And if they can do that, they'll be looking at maybe a top half finish in the conference, seriously.
Right. And if you have that, that'll definitely help your cause here, especially if you can get to double-digit wins in the Big Ten. Of course, not easy, but we'll see what Indiana can do there. Purdue looks like an absolute juggernaut. Couple of strange results, though. Wisconsin looked pretty rough early in the season, and then they went out and won by double digits against Virginia, who's a top 25 team. Minnesota looked really good against Missouri before totally collapsing late in the second half. That would have been a really nice win for a team in the bottom of the conference. Of course, Michigan State, couple of losses this year, home to James Madison and the neutral against Duke. Michigan State will be in the conversation when it's all said and done. So looking forward to seeing how Tom Izzo props up his team between now and the end of the year. The two other undefeateds are Nebraska and Penn State. I'm not sure who would have predicted that coming in. Nebraska with a tricky game against Duquesne later today on this Wednesday. They beat Oregon State by double digits at a neutral site. And then Penn State under new coach Mike Rhodes. Fascinating to see how they develop here. They've got a tricky game coming up in that MTE against Texas A&M here on Thanksgiving. So looking forward to seeing how that plays out. I actually think Indiana is a top half team in the Big Ten when it's all said and done.
I don't think that's gonna be good enough because I think the Big Ten is only gonna have like 6 or 7 seeds.
I don't know. Six might be a struggle if you ask me. I think the Big Ten's got to really smash these non-conference games between now and the end of December if they want to get 7 in the field after putting, I think, 9 in last year. I think it's a really an uphill climb, especially if you look at some of these teams in the Ivy League. Could the Ivy League get 2 teams in this year? How about a team like James Madison? They probably get into the tournament if they have a good record when it's all said and done, even if they don't win their conference tournament. And so it's going to be tough sledding for teams outside the top 4, the top 5 in the Big Ten. So even if Indiana does go top half, I think that's going to be tough. But hey, as long as you're able to do it, that's all that matters. Indiana's got to find a way to unlock a couple of things. I think there's so much room for growth with this team. And, Mike Woodson will do what he can to get that. We've talked about it so far, whether it's Mackenzie Mbako developing more, whether it's Khalil Ware stepping out and becoming more of a three-point threat, whether it's CJ Gunn or Anthony Walker, Peyton Sparks really emerging as a 6th, as a 7th man in the rotation. We've seen what Gabe Cupps can do from a defensive side. There's a lot Indiana can do. Will they go to zone more often with these guys that have 7-foot wingspans down low? There's definitely a lot that the Hoosiers can do there. But, at the end of the day, Matt, I don't think 20 wins is good enough for Indiana to get into the tournament. Does that sound like something that you agree with? Or do you think, hey, if they can get to 20, that should be a good sign?
I think it depends on the 20 wins.
Sure.
Like if one of those comes against Kansas or a couple against Michigan State later on in the year.
You only have one game against the Spartans, but you do get Purdue twice.
Purdue, one against Purdue, one against Michigan State or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like then, yes, I totally see, this team being able to make the tournament, but it's just going to be a matter of quality wins. They're going to lose some head scratchers. Like this would have been
Louisville,
season ender
right?
if they had lost to Louisville. Yeah, that would have been a season ender. I think losing to Harvard will be the equivalent. Yeah. Wright State would have been the equivalent. But again, they've shown the ability. They're in these tough games that they'll figure something out. Something to keep them afloat in the game until they can kind of get an in-game adjustment that, like the zone, or taking
Gabe
Mbako out and
Cups.
playing three
Yeah.
guards, or Gabe Cups. They have enough versatility in this roster that they can find something out. It's about giving themselves enough time to figure it out, and not putting themselves in such a deep hole like they did in UConn, where it's 15 points here, 15 points here, 15 points here, 15 points here. Okay, you get it down to 8.
Mm.
Oh, they
7.
go back
Yeah.
on a run. Okay, yeah, and then they land the kill shot, right? Because I think, again, if that Indiana game is a 1 or 2 possession game at the end of that UConn game, that's a win.
Yeah.
That is a W, in the Indiana arsenal, right?
Grand
In
scheme
the
of the thing. Yeah.
playbook, in the grand scheme of things, because I'm looking at the way UConn handled Texas, right? That's a Final Four team again, and they're not even playing with their 5-star freshman in Castle,
Exactly.
right? So again, that team is disgusting, right? And they're going to be back in March. They'll be back in the Final Four most likely. They might even win the Big East, right? It's going to be them and Marquette, who's also looking really good out in Maui, playing Purdue later
So
today.
good. Big East is loaded.
I really think Indiana's going to learn a lot from that UConn game. UConn guards were so physical with IU, so physical.
The funny
right?
thing
Sometimes
is, though,
I thought a little bit too much.
and the funny
Right?
thing
Yeah,
is,
what's
yeah.
the funny thing?
Well, and to me, yeah, not only did I think Indiana get kind of a tough whistle there, especially Xavier Johnson.
Yeah.
I will say, watching Indiana and UConn and Texas all in the same gym, like I think Indiana's just as big, just as strong, just as fast, just as athletic as far as their personnel. I really do. It's just a matter of putting it all together.
100%, yes.
And that's what's frustrating, because you sit here and you see Louisville go right down to the wire against Texas. And you were just saying, man, couldn't Indiana have done that against UConn? That would have been
Indiana would have
encouraging.
beaten Texas the way they played against UConn. I fully believe that.
And that's what's frustrating. By the way, let me ask you that question. Would you rather have had Indiana face Texas or Louisville on Monday?
I would have rather Indiana faced, both those teams. I would have rather avoided UConn at all costs, but I don't think it's like a bad, like I think the team will be like, no, it was good for us to play UConn, and I agree with that sentiment that, like, they needed that tough test, right?
Yeah,
they needed that test of playing UConn and playing a defending national title team, right? Like, that's good for the team.
Right.
I just, for resume purposes only,
makes sense.
I would have liked them to have a little bit easier time in the tournament, right?
Yeah,
but
makes total sense there. Personally, I was kind of rooting, I was kind of rooting for Louisville to win that game after Indiana lost to UConn. As Louisville was facing Texas, I was like, I wouldn't mind Indiana getting a second crack at a top 25 team here. But look, Indiana did what they had to do on Monday. They covered against Louisville. He got it in 6.5 or 7. And of course, Indiana did learn a lot about themselves, just as far as the personnel, the zone defense, and things like that. So a lot to digest and chew on, as Indiana now has a few days off before a game against Harvard on Sunday, and then a few more days off before a home game against Maryland to start Big Ten play. We're going to dive into this Harvard-Indiana matchup right now, folks. The Harvard Crimson out of the Ivy League come in as the 139th ranked team in the country per KenPom. That is a few spots ahead of Louisville and a lot more ahead of Florida Gulf Coast, the team that Indiana played to start the season. Harvard is 4-1 with a close loss at Boston College a few days ago, marking their only defeat of the season. Harvard has a fun game at Colgate later on today. I'll be checking in to see how that one goes. Freshman guard Malik Mack is off to a great start this season for the Crimson, averaging over 20 points per game. They've got 3 guys averaging 6 or more rebounds per game. Rebounding, of course, a major point of emphasis for this IU team, especially after they got clobbered by UConn on the boards. They did bounce back nicely against Louisville. Harvard's head coach is Tommy Amaker, who's about to start his 17th year and 16th season in the Ivy League with the Harvard Crimson. They did not play during COVID in the 2020-21 campaign, which is the explanation for that 1 year difference there. Of course, Amaker, formerly a player at Duke and a coach at the University of Michigan. Matt, as you look at this matchup, who do you think needs to step up for the Hoosiers? It looks like Indiana is going to be about a 6 or 7 point favorite at Gainbridge Fieldhouse in Indianapolis on Sunday. Who do you think needs to step up for the Hoosiers in order for them to win this game, preferably by quite a bit?
The bigs. The bigs got to step up. That's the biggest difference between IU and Harvard is the likes of Khalil Ware and Malik Renew, right? So they got to play like the superstars that they are, right?
Not asking for much, you know?
No, it doesn't take a lot.
Yeah, I know. And hey, you know, this Harvard team does like to play a little bit more up tempo. I think that does suit the Hoosiers a little bit better. And I'm looking forward to seeing Indiana sort of get up and down the court against the Crimson on Sunday afternoon. Malik Mack, yeah, I mean, this is a dude playing 32 minutes a game. Of course, being a 6'1" guard, you certainly do think Xavier Johnson will get that matchup. I'm looking forward to seeing how Mack does against Colgate later this afternoon before the Crimson come to Indianapolis and play the Hoosiers. We're going to wrap up our breakdown of this Harvard IU matchup on Sunday in just a bit. But first, it's time for a social media shout out where we're going to give a shout out to our channels. If you haven't found us on social media already, make sure you head over to Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube at Indiana HQ or at the Hoosier Sound. Matt on Instagram, we're not Indiana HQ, but what are we? Indiana.HQ is who we are there on Instagram. So overall, that's where you can find us over on social media.
That was my cue, wasn't it?
It's all
Sorry,
good. It's all right.
I was getting a text.
It's okay. There is a lot going on here on this Wednesday afternoon. So have no fear. On Instagram, you can find us at Indiana.HQ. Matt, the Indiana Hoosiers are projected to go into this Harvard game and knock off the Crimson Tide by about 6-7 points, according to Ken Pom. Who do you think wins this game on Sunday afternoon, and by how much?
I think Indiana will probably cover. I think they'll win by 8. They got too much talent for Harvard, I think. And at the end of the day, the talent is going to win out. And again, I think Woodson's a better coach than Tommy Amaker. I got some Michigan friends that'll probably tell you some things about Tommy Amaker that are not very nice,
very pleasant, yeah.
And probably kind of deserved, given his time in Michigan.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think IU will prevail in this one, but it will be uncomfortable for sure. It won't be as comfortable as people thought it was when they were like, "Oh, we're playing a mid-major team in Indy." Oh, perfect.
I'm nervous about this game, Matt.
Yeah,
I'm nervous about this game. I will say, Harvard coming off of back-to-back seasons where they went 5-9 in Ivy League play. Their rebounding is what really stands out to me. You know, some of these guards, Chandler Piguet has over 6 rebounds per game. Louis Lesmond has over 6 rebounds per game as he comes from France and experiences college basketball now in the United States. Justice Ajibor comes from overseas as well, from Nigeria, and he's had some solid games as far as rebounding is concerned. Yeah, I think Indiana's gonna win. Okay, I do. I was close. I think Indiana's going to win, but I think this is going to be one that comes right down to the wire. I think Indiana will do all right defensively, but struggle from an offensive standpoint. I got IU winning the 66-65 on Sunday afternoon.
Oh, it's for sure going to be uncomfy. I will sit here and guarantee that it will be uncomfy.
And I like your point as far as Indiana's big stepping up. Boston College's best players, their center, who's appropriately named Quinton Post. He had 20 points, 19 rebounds, and 5 blocks in helping Boston College knock off Harvard. But, I look at Malik Mack, who in that game had 18 points, 5 rebounds, 6 assists. Chisholm Okpara had 7 rebounds. Justice Ajibor had 9. Piguet had 8. I'm nervous about this game. I think this is going to be another one of those where Mike Woodson's going to have to make an in-game adjustment to personnel and to defensive scheme, and could see Harvard leading at halftime, but I do think Indiana will win. But it's going to be one of those where IU, I think, comes out of it by a point or two on Sunday in Indianapolis. And then I think they maybe have one of their better performances against Maryland. But as far as I'm concerned, this game against Harvard is going to be a royal pain in the rear. So looking
This
forward
Maryland
to
game
it.
is very winnable.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those.
Maryland is very winnable.
I mean, I think if Harvard and Maryland played straight up, I'd take Harvard right now. Like, I just think that's the way it is. So, that's how I actually see these teams. Just from a vibe standpoint, I like where Harvard is. I like where Wright State is. I liked where Louisville was much more than where Maryland is for this December 1st game at Assembly Hall. So, looking ahead, Matt and I will obviously talk about those two Big Ten matchups next week, but that's how we see things as they shape up here on November 22nd. Matt, any final thoughts here? Of course, our football team faces Purdue on Saturday. Men's basketball has a lot to digest.
The battle of the terribles in football.
Yeah, well, the problem is this is Ryan Walters' first year, and it's Tom Allen's seventh. So,
well, it might be Tom Allen's last, to be honest.
A little bit of a concern. Any final thoughts or comments from your end, Matt, as we wrap up here on Wednesday?
Yeah, I'm excited for the rest of basketball season. I think there's a lot of growth to be had on this team. And I for one, I think I was a little bit lower on IU than most IU fans were coming into the season. Like, I think a tourney berth would have been perfect for this team. I still agree with that sentiment that if they get to the tournament, that's a W.
I agree. Completely
and
agree.
anything else is kind of just extra icing on the top of the cake. They have too much talent to not be making the tournament. So that needs to happen, and they need to figure out how that's going to happen. But I mean, if we're being honest with you, they got to find guards in the transfer portal next year. That, you look around at the teams Indiana played this week, and all of them have really good transfer guards. That's what IU really needs going into next year, especially after losing Xavier Johnson, right? So,
yeah, that's a great point. I mean, we just saw Cam Spencer doing big things for UConn back on Sunday. You're seeing Max Asmus hit a game-winning shot for Texas after he came over from Oral Roberts. Indiana needs as much firepower as they can get as far as the backcourt is concerned.
Absolutely.
Give me 5 guys. And if you want to trim the rotation from that point, fine. But that's what stood out to me as well over the last handful of days. I just can't believe Nick Timberlake is at Kansas right now, getting barely any playing time. Joey Hart could have come to Indiana. He's riding the bench at Kentucky. These are little things that could have really helped the Hoosiers this season. I
would say the positive thing, Nithin, to me, the positive thing about all these misses that IU has is that they're misses, right? It's not like they're doing bad in the other places, right? Like the talent and even the transfers that we did get are doing really well. So it's like the talent identification from the staff is really good. They know their shit. Like, they know what they're talking about, right? They know what they want.
Yeah.
Right. And all the news I got about Dalton, people will make fun of me about Dalton Connect until the cows come home because I, was trolling on Twitter about it. But I had genuine insiders. Like, this is the problem with the insider game, is that, when things go wrong, everybody blames you, which is honestly fair. But I had genuine people who I know things come up and tell me, like, that staff is really confident in this. They feel like this is a thing. So and they don't normally say that. Like, they were confident about Mbako when the time happened. So I was teasing about that, right? The staff knows, they get word ahead of time, right? What is happening, right? And they had Dalton Connect in the palm of their hands. So, I will take the trolling because I deserve it, because, I leaked some information that I probably shouldn't have, and I was very confident in it. But, when the staff is that confident and they lose a player, it's tough to find a plan B. It's tough.
Well, and we talked about that with Dalton Connect. Chris Ledlam's off to a good start with
At
St.
St. John's.
John's.
Yeah.
Caden Shedrick is off to an awesome start with Texas.
He looked great.
Yeah, this life, Portal Combat, baby. As far as I'm concerned,
our transfers look great too.
our guys have stepped up. Khalil Wares looked really good. Peyton Sparks has stepped up. Anthony Walker was critical in helping beat Louisville on Monday, even though he's had some ups and downs. But a lot of college players have had ups and downs. So the big thing is when you're having a good game, your coach has got to ride you, and you got to end up getting that win. That is what Indiana did on Monday against the Louisville Cardinals. To me, my final thoughts, just the Big Ten here in men's basketball is just fascinating to me. I think every single one of these teams outside of Purdue can be really, really good on a given night, or they can be really, really bad. And over the next few weeks, I think you're going to see some shockingly awful losses. And you just hope that Indiana can avoid one of those, especially after that Kansas game, as the Hoosiers have 3 quad 4 opponents before facing the real meat of their Big Ten schedule in January. And then I think you're going to also see some really incredible wins. And you've seen Purdue rack up a couple of them, but I'm looking forward to seeing what Michigan does in the battle for Atlantis. Of course, Indiana has some big games coming up. Could Ohio State maybe knock off like UCLA or Virginia, West Virginia, I should say, this Maryland team? They had a couple of terrible losses in a tournament a couple of weeks ago, but they also face UCLA coming up in the non-conference slate. Nebraska, what are they going to do? Are they going to maybe trip up Creighton at some point? Could that be something where we look back and say, oh, we could have seen that coming. There are all sorts of fascinating games here. Nebraska also faces Kansas State, who had a good showing in a recent tournament before losing to Miami. So the Big Ten to me is absolutely incredible. It's going to be an unbelievable race this year. I think in previous seasons there were a lot of really good teams, and then you had some teams in the bottom of the league trip up opponents. This year, I think it's Purdue and everyone else, and everyone else can be either really good or awful.
Nithin, we started talking about, misses, right? And surprise misses, right? Who's been a really interesting surprise to me, and somebody I didn't think, or I thought Indiana should have targeted more? That's Gabe Cup's high school teammate, Reed Shepherd.
Kentucky.
For Kentucky. He fits everything Indiana needed. Like if you had told me before the year that Indiana was going to propose a trade to Kentucky and trade Mbako for Reed Shepherd, I would have called you crazy. But I think right now I would kill for that trade, because Reed Shepherd is exactly the kind of player that Indiana needs on this roster. It's a Kentucky that can shoot the ball, and Kentucky would have taken that trade, I think, as well. So, I think again the staff didn't go after him very hard, but they offered him late. They kind of got in late, and also his dad's a Kentucky basketball alum, so it's going to be an uphill battle in the first place. But the talent identification is there. It's there.
Kentucky,
they gotta hit.
Mr. Shepherd is a Kentucky basketball alum, but Indiana was hot on his trail. Dan Dockage tweeted out a story about that. And so there might be an even bigger reason why Mr. Shepherd would have ensured that Reed didn't end up at Indiana. But that's a whole different.
Gabe Cupps and him would have been mwah.
Yeah, I mean, one more guard. Preferably 2, but one more guard would have changed everything.
Well, I'm excited for this next year because I think Indiana can kind of go and show tape of the kind of shots that guards can get in the system that they run, and be like, we just need you to make them.
Yeah. Now it's going to be fascinating to track how Indiana recruits guards going forward here, but a lot of growth possible for this year's team. Fascinating, certainly, and looking forward to seeing how all of this shapes up between now and the end of this month, and then going into December. But folks, that about wraps it up for our 315th episode of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your support. To hear more fantastic episodes like the one you heard today, be sure to follow us at Indiana HQ and at the Hoosier Sound to make sure you don't miss any in the future. You can also go to our website, IndianaHU.com, to find it all in one place. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation. We will see you next time.
Peace and love. Happy Thanksgiving.